think that code of morality gets you a long way.
Professor, would you like to allude to essentially a crucial question on the definition of God? The gentleman here defined it as God as a necessary existence.
Well, it's a meaningless remark, isn't it? I mean, you can play with words. I could say God is the fundamental leprechaun. I mean, it's just nonsense.
I'm giving you the definition to disprove God.
So I'm going to take some more questions. Okay, gentleman right in the middle there. Yep.
So,
yep.
I'll make 3 statements. I believe in God, and I still believe in, so that's where I take away good things for you. Secondly, I didn't find any of your reasonings logical. Because what I observed was you either went back to 0 or straightway to infinity, nothing in between. Just because we do not know so much about infinity and we are not sure about the 0, it does not mean that you can just fool us around in that zone. We have a finite zone which we know about. Why don't you try to prove the existence of God in that zone? This converse of that problem goes to the atheist. You always try to say that we know this, there's a reason for this, that. Why do you not move around that zone? Why don't you come to their domain and prove it that God does not exist?
My question is to Mr. Atkins. Basically, I believe that everything that you create, right, has a manual. So everything in the creation has a manual, how it works, how it's not worked, how long it's lasting for, or in that matter. Now, when you were talking about the books, I strongly disagree, because when, not only with my religion, which is Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and every religion, they call on the same principle. When the creation was created, there was the manual was sent down. So with this manual, there are so many signs and so many proofs that science have just discovered. Can you tell me then who is that person who's made that, who's made the answer and who's given the actual the instructions? Because you're telling me there's no creation, there's no creator. So could you tell me who's made the actual instructions? Thank you.
I think it's important that we stay away from emotional arguments. And I think it's important that we actually get back to the subject, the one that was actually presented in the presentation. This is specifically for Dr. Atkins. They presented a quite clear, rational step as to why the Creator exists. I mean, your argument is that it's for the people who believe in God to prove it. Well, they've presented an argument, a very simple argument. I'll outline it again very briefly. We can accept that there are limited dependent things in the universe. Where do these limited dependent things come from? Is there an infinite chain of creating? Is there an infinite chain which brought these things into existence? We clearly prove that's not the case, because there is no example in the universe of an infinite chain. Now the question is, where? I mean, in the universe, tangible objects, yeah, or an infinite chain. Now the question is can you please try and address the argument? I prove it or disprove it? Because your whole argument is that we need to prove that God exists. Now, an argument has been presented to yourself, but you haven't really touched upon the actual argument. You addressed the issue of can science measure intangible things or tangible things, and that's one discussion. But can you please try and actually address the argument that was presented to yourself?
So I'm not very familiar with not very familiar with the Quran. Doesn't the Quran say that everything is made from water?
No. My question was, when you say it, that I'm not talking about my religion, I'm talking about the religion in the whole world, whatever religion there is, there seems to come...
Does the Quran say everything is made from water?
Yeah. You're misquoting.
Don't turn this into a religion.
You're misquoting. So everything in the world, like every religion in the world, because that's where the proof of the God debate comes from.
The Quran say that everything...
No, we're not discussing religion.
No, we're not talking. I'm not going to discuss.
I think... Okay, look, I'm going to have to ask everyone to calm down. Just to make clear, I'm more than capable of controlling this if you let me. So please.
It was a very important question because it was asserted that there is a handbook, and I'm beginning to doubt the veracity and reliability of the handbook.
No, the Quran says we made everything living from water. Not everything. Yeah, there's a big difference.
Okay. Maybe the next debate we can invite the professor again, and maybe we can go on to discuss this. But I'm going to have to move on from this question now. If you'd like to answer I think what's come to the crux of the matter today, that the theist side has presented an argument. Would you like to go to their premise and respond to their argument?
I'm afraid I didn't actually understand the argument, because it seemed to be like all arguments on the theist side, simply based on analogies and the vague extension of mathematical ideas to the existence of God and the existence of the universe. It had no actual content. What I'm saying, and I will go back to the Occam's razor deployment again, is that science discovers truth by seeking simplicity. That scientists are hewers of simplicity out of complexity. And what scientists are trying to do is to find the simplest possible explanation. And it is taking an enormous amount of time, an enormous amount of intellectual effort. And the progress that they are making towards answering that fundamental and crucial question is not going to be blown out of the water by weak arguments based upon mathematical analogies.
Okay, I'll let I think the gentleman say something. It's been a while.
Sorry, just on the last point that Professor Atkins was making about analogy. In these debates, you'll often find at the very end it comes down to saying that we're just using analogy. So I would like to say something to you about the basis of proof that I gave at the very beginning. Science cannot deal with the question of whether something was made, who made it, cannot deal with the intangibles, so it doesn't apply. So even if we are using Occam's razor, we can't use science. If we're going to use the rational thinking, which is we use the information that we currently hold, then, and remember, it's irrational not to, then we look at things that are limited. We understand that their limitation, their contingency, their neediness, the fact that they're dependent means they needed something to make them. That's what we're saying. We're using rational thinking. And remember what I said to you about not using irrational thinking. If you do not use the information that you hold, if you refuse to do it, if you abrogate the thinking mind, then you are vulnerable to the counter question. Why are you abandoning your previous information and cause and effect when it comes to the question of God, but not when it comes to the question of what's happening at home? Is that still your wife? Is that your car? Are those keys? Is that your shower? What's a shower? If you don't use previous information, and if you abandon it in the discussion of this question of a God and creation and so on, then why aren't you using it everywhere else? And that's inconsistent and it's irrational. And that's why we say it's not about analogy. It's like the Alamo. It's your last place to hide and fight. It's not about analogy, it's about rational thinking. Science doesn't apply, science doesn't apply, science doesn't apply.
Okay, I'm going to take the final 3 questions now. So please make sure your question is relevant to the topic. The lady. Sorry.
This is something fundamental in your argument. You're saying that science doesn't go with the intangibles. Science says science has predicted the existence of Higgs boson and graviton, and also predicted the existence of antiparticles. And at the time, it wasn't observed. It wasn't tangible, and there was no way to actually observe it. Do you think that these things aren't real, or do you think that science is dealing with intangibles, or do you think that it's just wrong?
Pretty sure that's a gentleman there with his hand up.
I think what's happened is, and I'll tell you guys all the time, but what's happened is the most important question is being avoided. The whole issue is, you told me what you don't believe in, you told me what you do believe in, and you both call it God, but you haven't told me what God is. As in, to reach a definition of God. For example, when you were presenting an argument regarding energy and charge and how you have negative and positive charge. You said, you know, God is a very busy person if there was all this energy and all these things. For God to be busy tells me that your understanding of what God is, or the definition that religion puts to God, is wrong. And therefore, if I was told that God is very busy, I would say I don't believe in God as well. But that's by that definition that God can be busy. Or if God is a fundamental level, for example, as you said, but that by definition cannot be God. So the question is, if you could actually tell us what God is, and for you to tell us what the existence came from, so why existence exists, that might be God. I've spoken to many atheists and many theists. In conclusion, fundamentally, actually believe in the same thing. So, for example, they might say that it's due to an infinite energy or an infinite lack of energy that existence came into existence. That's what atheists would say. And some theists would actually turn around and say, you know what, that's exactly what I believe in. It's just that I define that as God. Whereas you haven't told me...
Thanks. The final question would be... the gentleman waiting patiently in the blue shirt, blue jumper. No, you haven't got a blue jumper on, sorry, the gentleman behind you. Yeah, blue shirt. No. I do need to...
First of all, a response to him about necessary existence. Number one, that's a completely illogical concept. What you just said is that you can define God into being by giving him the property of existence. Existence isn't a property, ergo you cannot define God into being like that. Now, a direct response to you. I think your analysis of causality is completely flawed. You wanted to know about the cause of the universe. Now, two interrelated questions about this. Number one, there is no logical reason to presuppose that existence is more or less likely than non-existence. Ergo, existence doesn't technically need an explanation. Second of all, you said that, okay, well, we've got everything that has a beginning needs a cause. But our notion of causality, our understanding of it, is based upon things in the universe. It is the relationship between objects and events in the universe. It therefore does not apply to the universe itself as a whole. In the same way that we can analyze, oh, you know, every human being needs a mother and a father. That doesn't mean you can come around and ask coherently, who was the mother of mankind as a whole? That is why your analysis of causality is flawed. It does not apply to the universe as a whole.
I'd like to take the first question. It's a great question. If I can just try and transfer what I understood from your question. Science can prove things in the fact that it uses a scientific method, but it also must use the information that we currently hold. What I'm attacking is not using the information you currently hold in some things and not on others. So of course science can prove, what is it, the graviton? Of course, but it used this rational method as well, because we can see when there's something taken away from something, or when we can see the existence of something by its effect, then we can understand using rational method that obviously there's something there. The problem is using the scientific method. Okay, just quickly. Is it the scientific method alone, or are we also using the information that we hold? That's the discussion. As I said, all of the proof that I was giving, all of the discussion and the basis was to say you must use the information that you hold.
When you're studying test, you said test, observe, and then what's the last one?
Test, observe, record.
Test, observe, record. Yeah. You also have to use your intuition, and all things that you said, like pizza and painting, that would have been... I completely agree with you that we need to use all of these things, but there are people who are saying that we use a scientific method only, we don't use information that we hold, we don't accept cause and effect. We don't accept that something that is limited, dependent, created, needs a creator, because we're going to abandon rational thinking on this question only.